Good morning. This is the day the Lord has made. We want to welcome you to this special edition of our Sunday morning worship with Pastor H. Levi McClendon III, your senior pastor of Mount Zion All Nations Bible Church. Please feel free to share today's broadcast with as many people as you know. Also, feel free to comment if you get encouraged, blessed, or stirred up as you hear the Word of God. And use the emojis at any time to get our online activity to be heard throughout our time. If you're watching YouTube Live, display us on your smart TV for your entire family to watch. During the month of October, we are asking you to join us in taking a look back at some special messages as we celebrate both our 95th church anniversary and the 26th pastoral anniversary of our great shepherd, H. Levi McClendon III. Please enjoy this morning's special message.
Let me express tonight for just a few minutes genuine appreciation to your pastor for the invitation to be here tonight at Mount Zion and this wonderful worship experience. I've been looking forward to spending some time with Pastor McClendon. I've been hearing so much about him over these many years, and such a warm and winsome person. I remember a friend used to say, "It's just nice to be nice." Yeah, it's just nice to be nice. Delighted to see Bishop Roberson here tonight. That says more about Pastor McClendon than it does about me. Manuel Scott Sr. used to say that whenever you're invited to be the preacher and preachers come, never get too excited about that. They're never coming for you, because preachers normally will not go anywhere where they don't feel welcome. It says more about the pastor than it does about the guest preacher. Yeah, that's the truth. So I want to say thank you. And what a wonderful, I drove up on your campus, I got all excited. This is one happening place you got here. I know you're excited about what the Lord's doing with you. Amen. So am I. I'm thankful what the Lord is doing also. Well, if I stumble through this sermon some, give me a few minutes to work it out. I know that you're not to make apologies. I actually teach preaching. I would flunk one of my students if they did this. But as the pastor was talking, I just felt a kind of homiletical shift to say something else to the church, because he mentioned 2 or 3 themes in his preaching and his presentation. And I want to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. So if I stutter 1 or 2 times, I'm trying to work it out, all right? All right. Let's stand together for just a moment. And I want you tonight to open your Bibles to the book of Acts, chapter 17. Tonight, verses 16, 17, and 18 in our hearing. And say 2 or 3 things in regard to this text, as I believe it speaks to where we are as a church and fellowship tonight. We're in partnership together. And so I want us to be in partnership together as we do ministry. All right? Acts chapter 17, beginning at verse 16. And I'm reading from the New International Version. I see you are too. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, when those who were there, a group of Epicureans and Stoic philosophers, began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Before you sit down, I want to tag this Christianity and culture. You may be seated. During my last examination, my optometrist, doctor, I want to help you see better, asked me to look through this metal contraption that he put over my, and then he flipped through a series of lenses to try and sharpen my vision to focus on what he asked me to look at, and that was a red dot against a white wall. It was really a red circle, but I located it, indicated that I see it, and he continued the routine over again, several times in fact. And then I discovered what he was really trying to get me to see is that I was not looking at just one circle, but it was actually two circles dividing. And as it divided, it traveled in different directions. He was checking my peripheral vision, but also he wanted to see how far my sight would stretch before I started straining. And when I saw it and I said, now I can fill your prescription. He said, what I discovered is that you don't need one lens. You don't need bifocal. You need trifocal. You can see far, near, or nearer. And thus tonight, I see you better because I'm not straining. In a very real sense, that's exactly what Christianity and culture is doing tonight. For many years, we lived under one single dot. It was called Christendom. It was an era where you could assume almost everybody you met knew something about God, Christ, and the church. But since post-enlightenment, and particularly now, you don't have to be a scholar to know it. You meet people in the marketplace every day that has no semblance of understanding who God is. And so tonight, our vision has moved from singularity to double vision, from merely Christianity to Christianity and culture. And so now we're asking ourselves, can we be honest and call the culture by the name that it lives under? And are we bold enough to follow God in uncharted territory? Well, that's where this text finds the Apostle Paul. Like a leaf caught up in the velocity of wind, he was picked up and landed off the Mediterranean at Athens, the intelligentsia center of the entire Greek world. It was from this place that Hellenist Greeks influenced the culture of the world. And Paul, verse 16, waited for his ministerial duo to accompany him while he was in Athens. So he decided to do what most of us, as strangers and foreigners to Athens, he let his sandals take him on a walk and journey through Athens while he waited on Saul, or rather on Silas and Timothy, to make their arrival. They never arrived, so he took in all the sights of Athens. He himself, being a university man, a graduate of the University of Tarsus, we don't get a chance to meet this side of Paul very often. Often we see him in Corinth, Thessalonica, in Berea, in Ephesus, merely as an itinerant preacher. But here we get a chance to see another side of Paul, the side that so often we talk about biographically when we describe him, of being a man of culture and language. But he's not protesting against Athens. He's just merely walking around Athens. And there his mind goes to work. He knows that this is the apogee of intelligence. And as he walks around through the agora, he said this is the place where Socrates would engage people in the marketplace through daily conversation. Further down the road of Athens, close to the Acropolis, he came to the school of Plato. He said this is the place where the philosopher would teach. And even further still, he would see the Lyceum, where Aristotle himself taught his disciples. He was taking in the art, listening to the music, listening to the recitations of poets, hearing people cite long verses of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, passing by the amphitheater, watching the Hippocrates exchange masses as they would play different parts on the theater stage. People were interacting throughout all of the marketplace, and he really was enjoying it. And as he looked around this wonderful place, situated just off the Mediterranean, more specifically the Aegean Sea, he looked at it and said, this is a place where a person of culture can really. But then the more he looked at it, and the more he took in the sights and the sounds and felt the texture and watched the branding of Athens, his eyes was lifted to see all of these niches, crevices, cracks, filled with these little gods. And something affected his Jewishness, his sensibility of religion was turned upside down. He couldn't take it anymore. It's verse 16. Something happened to him. He became actually viscerally disturbed as he saw a whole city, a country, the place of intelligence being run over by idols. And it disturbed him to the point where he didn't know what to do. And from that very line in verse 16, you and I discover something, don't we? And that is that the Bible provides for us a kind of paradigm how we can bear witness to a godless culture. And response to the statement, verse 16 is tailored to teach us that together as a church, as Christians, ought to make an assessment on the culture. That's what Paul did, that's what the church is doing, and that's what we ought to do. And that is to make an assessment of the culture. Back up one more time through the streets of Athens, and just imagine him going by the Parthenon. And there he is, he looks at this Parthenon. He sees here all of these gods. In fact, one writer says that you could find a god before you could find a man. There were gods everywhere, little gods, big gods, tall gods, wide gods. And this is no exaggeration. There were gods on the steps, over the portals, the doorposts. They were carved into the marble. Any way you wanted, it was a god. Their God, God everywhere. And the Jewishness of Paul, him being a one God thinker, just couldn't take what he was saying because it was against everything of the he understood. All he knew is that there was one God and Yahweh is his name. And now here are all of these competing little gods that he's looking at once again in the most intelligent place in the world. And he was trying to come to some conclusion. How could you have the University of Michigan there? How could you have Michigan State University and believe in gods that have eyes and cannot see, ears and cannot hear, a mouth and cannot talk, hands and cannot reach down and lift you up? And the question tonight is, as we make an assessment on culture, the way people talk, what they look at, what they listen to, what they read, how they interact, like Paul, we don't judge the culture, but we ought to at least make an assessment of the culture. We don't criticize the culture, but we ought to make an appraisal of it. Because what some people call valuable is not valuable to God. And if it's not valuable to God, it ought not be valuable to us. Just one-sided example of this is we claim to be, as we look in the rearview mirror of American history, a people who say that the brothers who framed our Constitution implemented that we are one nation under God. I'll go with that. And then we put it in our anthems, God bless America. We put it on our money, in God we trust. But you don't have to, again, be a scholar to come to one conclusion. Seeing how the ring has divided and is no longer singular, you have to ask, what God are we really talking about? It used to be a time, not even 100 years ago, that you could say God and everybody knew you were talking about the eternal, everlasting God. Now when you say God, you just wonder about God, Yahweh. Are they talking about Allah? Are they talking about the God, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma? What God are they talking about? But maybe religiosity is too far of a reach. But there are gods, and all of us, we may not call them by these names, but all of us know these gods because people worship in their temples every single day. There are people tonight, right here at Zion, in this fellowship who worship at the shrine of materialism every single day. That is, we assume that the more I have in car, clothes, and cash, if I have more of it, we sing Madonna's song, we are material girls in a material world. We feel like if I have more things, if I have more branding, if I have Manhattan logos tattooed on my hips and in my pockets and in my purse and in my pants, if I have all of that, that's where my value and my worth is determined. But the reality is that we know that everything material is Tory. At the other hand, there are people that bow down and worship at the altar of capitalism. We've been taught that from our very birth. That is, get you an education so you can get a job, so you can get you some money, so you can buy you a house, so you can get you a car, so you can have you some investment. And God never came against us and said you couldn't have financial resources, but whenever you make your money your God, where you assume that money is your power, that money gives you accessibility and puts you above someone else, you have turned it into just another little God. What about worshiping at the temple of relativism, where nothing is absolute? Alan Bloom says in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, the one thing that he is sure of, that when university students come to his school, is that they have drawn the conclusion that there's nothing absolute. I hear what you're saying. What business does that have with us, man? You done come all the way from Texas here to say something like that. We're disinterested in that. Because if there's no moral absolutes, then there's no right or wrong. And you can't not educate a child if you don't have something absolute that they can put their groundings in. And that becomes the problem, because it's all right if it stays at the shrine of the mall, the temple, in the marketplace. But when relativism, pragmatism, materialism, capitalism walks down the aisle of the church and began to vie for its position to be heard, then you got problems, because people are looking for something that will work. And it ought to disturb us when we hear about it. That's what happened to Paul. He looked at all these gods and he was disturbed inwardly when he saw how these idols, that is, these little demigods that didn't have any definitive power, when he looked at them, he was disturbed by what he saw. Well, the reality is simply this. You make an assessment on the culture. Yes, you do. Be careful not to capitulate to what you assess. Because the problem most of us have is we want to make an assessment. Then we start acting like, looking like, and becoming what we make an assessment of. And that's always a danger when you start looking like what you start appraising. The truth is, you can't stay immersed
in the culture and think that you're going to make a statement about the culture. And so at that moment, you look and see in verse 16 what Paul does. He makes an assessment of the culture. That's you and I looking at the world, looking at Michigan, coming close to DeWitt, looking down the street at Lansing, up the road to Grand Rapids, looking down and around the corner to Flint, and to make an assessment of it. God has not put us here just to absorb the culture. He's put us here to make a difference in the culture. He says you're in the culture, but you're also above the culture. And other times you're against the culture, but your role is salt and light to the culture. That when people come here, some ought to be so different that they do call you a strange group of people. Ain't nothing wrong with folks saying they mighty strange over there. Well, Paul looked and he walked. I'm almost through now. And he walked and he talked and he looked, and look what happens. He said, after he looked at all those gods, verse 16, verse 17, he said, I can't take this no more. I got to go to church. Because after you assess the culture, you got to disengage the culture that you assess. Look at verse 17. Where did it go? I like this crowd. This is the Bible study crowd. It's in there. You got your Bible open? Where did he go then? He went where? To the what? He went to the synagogue, the Jewish worship center, the equivalent of the church today. He said after he looked at all of those idols, he said, I got to go to church. Be something in us that would drive us to the church. He went to the synagogue because he knew in the synagogue there were certain absolutes that he could find in a culture run over by false absolutes. He knew in the synagogue, number one, God would be there. But also it says he went there with God-fearing Jews and Gentiles that were worshiping. He knew that there would be people in the fellowship that believed the way that he believed. I think too often, not you because you're here, that the church gathers and we just don't understand our authentic purpose. I was watching when the pastor said, put your arms around somebody. I think so many times we hear that we just assume that that's just something to get us to do something. The role of the church above just worshiping God is to encourage one another. That's why you turn, shake hands, embrace somebody. I know most folk don't want to be touched. I know they don't want to, but there's therapy in touch. There's something spiritual in tactile connection. There's something that happens when you put your hand on somebody else and then say, I'm praying for you. That's what he found in the synagogue. God was there. There were some people in there, but he also had some folk reading from the Torah. They were reading Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. Then they had replicas of Aaron's budding rod. Then they had the artifacts of the stones in which God, with his finger, had written out the 10 Commandments. Then somebody was singing a hymn out of the Psalm. And so when you've been run over by the false absolutes in the world, you ought to be glad to show up at the church house. Because there are certain things that you know that you can find here that you can't find nowhere else. There are things that happens in this place that you can't get down the street, at the theater, at the club, at the party. Let the party be the party on the party, but when you get to church, church ought to be church. I wouldn't dress up. I wouldn't make up. I wouldn't drive down the street to come to church, not to go to church. And I ain't waiting on nobody to stir me up for church. I got a built-in praise and shout of what the Lord has done for me. And the reality is you don't know like I know what the Lord has done for me. Go on, preach, Pastor West. And the reality of it is that when we come here, we disengage from the culture so that we can get our focus back. My optometrist was trying to get me to see that you got two rings and they're divided. He says, and I want to see how far you can look before your eyes start straining. Well, all of us live under a strain every day in this culture. But when we disengage the culture and come to Zion, this is a place where we can get our perspective back. I think as you assess the culture and not amalgamate to it, you ought to read everything else read, watch what everybody else watch, listen to what everybody else listen to. But when you get through with all of that, there comes a time you got to divest yourself from all of that and say, I got to go somewhere where I can hear heaven's music, heaven's language, and sacred speech. Disengaged from the culture. There was a fella back in the mid 1980s, 20th century, by the name of Francis Schaeffer. And Schaeffer was an evangelical. He was kind of mystic and philosophical, but he was certainly an apologist. That is, he stood defense for the gospel. And it looks like he abandoned the culture, but he didn't. He found a place, a commune up in the Alps of Switzerland, Le Havre, and there he would write against the culture. You remember in 1933 and 1973, the Human Manifestos were written to say that man was his own universe. A woman is her own God. You know, you're the center of that. Well, Francis Schaeffer wrote from the Alps and said, not true, that's a manifesto, and that is that we are the imago Dei. We are in the image of God. We don't have our own image. We are like in the image of God. Now back up. The truth is, the only way he could make that assessment on the culture is that he had to disengage from the culture. You can't look at the news all day and think you're going to make a critique on the news. You can't listen to what everybody else listens to all day and think you're going to make a proper assessment of it. You got to back up from it long enough to disengage, take your eyes off of it so that you can get back into the race. If you know about baseball pitchers do this all the time. And these baseball pitchers, they get up to the mound and they'll look down the line. And you got this catcher there giving him signals. And the pitcher is shaking his head, no. You know, curve, no. Slide, Fast ball straight down the line. That's all he wants. And what does he do? He looks, he agrees. And then he turns his eyes off of the pitcher, off of the catcher, and the batter, and the plate. Winds up, kick, and go. Come on back, because you missed me right there. I'm giving you my baseball thing here. You missed it. There comes a moment that the pitcher gets his signal from the catcher where he's to throw the ball. Upon agreement, he now turns away. He disengages. He lifts his eyes all up into the stands, looks back down, goes through his routine, but in his head, he knows where he's going to throw that ball. Now, if the pitcher got to disengage, to throw the plate, what more do you and I think we need to do when it's time to come and worship God? You can't clown around all day and then just come out of foolishness and think you're going to start praising God. You can't sit down and talk all day and think you're just going to stand up in the pulpit and preach. You're not going to do that. You got to disengage. You got to back up. You got to shut things out so you can hear what God has to say in your human circumstance. One more thing and I'm through. When Paul did that, he made an assessment of the culture. He didn't capitulate to it. He appraised it. He disengaged, but in verse 17, notice what he does. He is reasoning in the synagogues. That is, he's making the gospel clear. That's what that word means, reasoning. He is making the gospel clear. Because there's an assumption in the church that people just know the gospel. I'm telling you, right now, you and I, wherever we live, we can pick up a handful of pebbles, throw them in any direction, hit an apartment, hit a house where people live, and where those pebbles fall, there's somebody who's never heard a clear presentation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And in the synagogue, the term he reasoned is that he gave a clear presentation, look, in the synagogue. And then he moves from the synagogue into the what? Marketplace. So the last thing that he does is he disengages to re-engage. And that is, when you engage the culture, you have to engage the culture at its popular points. There are two places where Paul engaged the culture. One was in the marketplace, and the other ones was at the level of intelligence. He went to the agora. The agora is the flea market. This is where human traffic is walking around. And now he's walking and he's just talking the same speech he's rehearsing that he had a captive audience in the synagogue with. He's reasoning, that is, giving a clear presentation of the gospel, the kerygma. That is, he's talking about Jesus, who was supernaturally born, vicariously died, and mysteriously resurrected, and gloriously gone back to the Father, and wonderfully will come back again. And that's all he was talking about. Jesus was born, Jesus died, Jesus was buried, and Jesus got up. That's all he was doing, and that's the gospel. He didn't assume because the University of Athens was there that everybody knew the gospel. He didn't assume because they were smart that they knew the gospel. He didn't assume because they had credentials that they knew the gospel. And it's a mistake that the church makes, that you look at the complexity of people and the superficiality of people and assume because they got a balling and shot calling that they know the gospel. Some of the worst hooks and crooks in the world are folk with suits, shirts, and ties on. Go on, preach, Pastor West. I got to preach it now. And so here he is in the marketplace. And in the marketplace, he's just reasoning the same speech and rehearsing what he said in the synagogue. And he engages the culture at the popular point. This church tonight has a popular point of personal contact. Every one of us have a sphere of contact that we have influence in. It might be at the university. It might be at the college. It may be at the high school or the elementary school. It may be in your marketplace where you play, where you recreate. It may be in your house or just riding around with your friend. But all of us got a place, a marketplace where human traffic is, where we ought to be reasoning the same story that we hear in church. It's one thing for the pastor to preach, but that's for your edification. And once you've been, you got to rehearse the same speech that you heard in Zion on the streets of DeWitt and Lansing. You got to take the gospel of Jesus wherever you go. And then you can't be ashamed to take it. Don't be worried about how you sound, and don't be caring about what questions they ask. Let them ask any question they want to ask. If you don't know the answer, just tell them, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I once was blind, but now I see. I was lost, but now I'm found. Because can't nobody out tell your story like you can tell your story. Let me ask you, has the Lord done anything for you? I'm not playing with you. I'm real serious. Has the Lord done anything for you? Don't worry about if your conversion is dramatic like Paul on Damascus. It might be quiet like Timothy at his grandmama's house. But salvation is salvation. The Lord ain't had everybody off of drugs. He ain't have to save everybody out of jail. If you were good and ethical, fine. He still had to save you from your own personal goodness. Just tell somebody, I thought I was good, but the Lord gave me something better. That's what he said in the marketplace. But then finally, he went to the popular point of the intelligence. And now he moves, look at this, from the agora, and now he walks into the Acropolis. And that's west side of the Areopagus. And so when he gets there, notice that there are two groups that's waiting on him. The Epicureans and the Stoics. You got to watch it. I'm about to start shouting up in here now. The Epicureans and the Stoics. Wouldn't you know they just like the religious Pharisees and Sadducees? They didn't get along at all, but as soon as you can attack Jesus and confront the church, they started coming together. Interestingly, isn't it amazing? Has no problem attacking Christianity. And here we are sitting back, arms folded, waiting, talking about when the Lord moved. He's already moved. You ought to have fun and engage the culture. On one hand, you had the Epicureans. That's the ones that said, eat, drink, and be merry. But beyond that, they really were known, but not just for pleasure. They had religion in their philosophy. They believed in gods, not in God, but in gods. But they wanted God to stay on the shelf. That is, stay in the Parthenon. Don't come out of your cage unless I need you. I don't want you involved in my human affairs. I don't want you dealing with how I raise my children, how I manage my resources, or the careers I choose in my life. You just be available to come to me, Lord, or little God, when I need you. Now, am I talking about Athens, or am I here in Michigan tonight? Because that sounds like the way a lot of us talk about God. That is, Lord, I want to know you're there. I just don't want you bothering in my private affairs. Up there until I need some help, when I need a promotion, when I need a raise, when I need a deliverance and a healing and a special blessing. Come on down here, Lord. But once I get it, get on back up there and don't bother me no more. Well, let me give you one more. Then you had the Stoics. The Stoics are those persons, they didn't cry, they didn't show emotion. They were austere and they were strong. They were kind of the pull yourself up by your own bootstrap people. They were a group of people that believe in the best of humanity, that is, of themselves. Am I talking about Athens? Or am I talking here in Michigan tonight? Because it seems like so much of what we hear now based on what we can do. That's what pragmatism is. Lord, give me a religion that works, not a God that works. Give me a religion that works for me. If it works for me, then I'll hold on to it. What happens then if you pray for the job and you don't get it? What happens if you pray for the healing and it don't come? What happens if you say, I need more, and you get less? Are you going to quit on God because you said God failed? Wants us to learn that he's the one that's been keeping us, not our 401ks. It ain't been our IRA accounts. It ain't been the NASDAQ, the Dow, or the New York Stock Exchange. It's been the Lord that's been keeping us. When recession comes, it's still going to be the Lord that's been keeping you. When inflation comes, it's going to be the Lord that's been keeping us. And when we ain't got no job, it's still going to be the Lord that's bread in a starving land. Good night, I got to get out of here. But now these two people, these ideas came together and they started fighting against Christianity. And notice in verse 18 what it says. They said, what is this babbler trying to say? What is he talking about? Look at the language. They called him a babbler. They called him a babbler, but they didn't know he was a man of the university too. And he started talking to them on their own level and in their own language. And they called him, in your translation might be a pseudo-intellectual. That is, they said means a seed picker. They said you've been picking up a piece of seed here, a piece of seed there, and a piece of seed there, and trying to put it all together. That's what the word babbler is, a seed picker. It has the idea of a cart of trash coming through the city of Athens. And when trash falls, you got some beggar coming behind, picking up food and eating the trash. They said all he's been doing is reading enough trash, trying to talk to us. He's just a babbler. And then look what they said. There others were there who wanted him to talk some more because he started talking about it. I'm through. Look at what he's talking about. Jesus and the resurrection. Wait a minute. They called him a babbler. That is a seed picker. They said he's a pseudo-intellectual. He don't know what he's talking about. He's just making up some stuff. Others said to him, he's talking about a strange God. And then look what he said, because he was talking about Jesus and the resurrection. I'm through now. Now, when they said Jesus and the resurrection, and you put it in light of the question when they said he's preaching gods, the only name you hear is Jesus. But then they started mistaking resurrection for another God. It's the Greek word where you get anastasis from. So they said that Jesus is the male God, anastasis is the female God. And by that time, Paul put his hand on his hip, started scratching his bald head, and said, I can't believe this. I am in the arena of intelligence. I'm in the place where folk are smarter than smart. I'm at the Ivy League of Greece. And here you got folk out here that don't know Jesus and the resurrection. I can understand they may not know about him, but they mistaken resurrection to be another God. And at that very moment, old Paul said, I got some more preaching to do. Good night, church. May God bless you. I'm through. And that's what God is telling us. You got some more preaching to do. Don't you assume because people come around, they already know the answers and they don't know the answers. No, they don't know. They need to hear you tell your story. And you tell it however you want to tell it. And talk about your Jesus any way you want to talk about it. That's what I liked about the saints of old. They didn't care what you thought about them. They just kept on talking about Jesus. You don't mind if I get happy for myself now? Because it's kind of hard for me to talk about Jesus and not get happy about it. And that Paul was just talking about Jesus. And I know what he was talking about. I do know what he was saying. He said, wait a minute, you want to know how I know him? He said, because I wasn't very different than you are. In fact, just a few chapters earlier in the book of Acts, I had documents in my hand to go out and destroy the church. I was a Pharisee of the Pharisee, circumcised on the 8th day. I knew the law front and back. And I was also a university man. And I said, this is an ignorant movement called this Jesus thing. And so I got on the back of my steed riding down Damascus. And I made my way to go destroy and stop the church in its tracks. And then something happened. I was knocked off my beast down on the ground. I looked up and I saw a light from heaven shining so bright until it blinded me. And the first words out of my mouth was, Lord, and I had to catch myself because there I was confessing that Jesus is Lord, the very one that I was trying to stop is the same one that I said, Lord, have I got a witness? Somebody here, you know just what I'm talking about, that you didn't want to have nothing to do with Jesus, but the same one that you were trying to shut down is the same one that you said, Lord. And Paul said, I know that my Redeemer. Good night now, Zion. May the Lord bless you real good. But on my way to heaven, I want somebody to know that Jesus lives. Have I got a witness? On your way from here, you ain't got to wait till Easter to tell somebody that Jesus lives. Have I got a witness? Yeah, I know he lives. He walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me that I am his child. And I'm glad tonight that I know he lives. Yes, yes, yes. Hallelujah, yes. Leave here tonight and just tell somebody if the Lord been good to you. You ought to tell somebody if he's picked you up. You ought to tell somebody if he's wiped the tears from your eye. You ought to tell somebody, hey! Oh, yeah. Ain't God all right? Ain't he all right? Let redeemed of the Lord say so. If the Lord's been good to you, you ought to say so. If the Lord's been a blessing to you, you ought to say so. Yeah! 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 Do you love him tonight? Ain't God all right? Why don't you help me? Help somebody in the room that might be going through where culture's got the best of them and they feel like they can't make it. Find somebody, look them in the eye, and just tell your neighbor, the Lord will make a way somehow. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I know he will. Have I got company in here? Is there anybody here that know he will? Yeah! Yeah! Yes! Yeah! Ah, yes, he will.
Thank you for joining us. If this teaching has been a blessing to you, we encourage you to sow a seed online through the Givelify app or visit our website, mtzionanbc.com. Also, feel free to mail your gift to us at Mount Zion All Nations Bible Church, 10575 Krebs Road, DeWitt, Michigan, 48820. Join us for our Sunday services online, corporate prayer, 8:30 a.m. via our conference call. Discipleship Development, 9 a.m. Zoom conference. Check our website and Facebook page for information. Our Sunday morning broadcast, 10:30 a.m. YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and on our website. And join Yet Ministries starting at 12 noon, Kids Bible Class for ages 3 through 10 from 12 noon to 12:30 p.m. And Youth Bible Class for ages 11 through 17, 12:30 p.m. to 1 p.m. Check our website and Facebook page for Zoom information. Be sure to join us for Pastor McClendon's 26th Pastoral Anniversary Weekend. This Saturday, we are planning a drive-through at the church on Saturday, October 17th, 2020 at 12 noon. Please arrive by 11:45 a.m. and park your vehicles in the far northeast lot so that we may arrange an orderly procession. All who are able are asked to come out and congratulate Pastor McClendon and Lady Maya. A gift box will be available so that we might bless our pastor for the blessing he has been to us for 26 years. Then on Sunday, there will be a virtual celebration of Pastor McClendon's 26th pastoral anniversary, Sunday, October 18th, 2020 at 10:30 a.m., which will include guest vocalists and other very special tributes. This is a service you do not want to miss. Join us as we celebrate this very special weekend. Every second and fourth Sunday, Pastor McClendon will host a What's Going On Zoom meeting for young adults ages 18 to 35. Please plan to join us for this up-close and personal conversation with Pastor by using the following info. Sunday, October 11th at 6 p.m., meeting ID 814-4823-5610. On Sunday, October 25th at 6 p.m., Meeting ID 837-3949-8691. Yep Ministry Prayer Call will be held every fourth Thursday of the month. Please join us on Thursday, October 22nd, 2020 from 7 to 7:30 p.m. The dial-in number is 712-770-5505. The access code 305-926-812#. All are encouraged to participate, especially our youth. As a reminder, concerning COVID-19 and the closure of Mount Zion All Nations Bible Church. Mount Zion All Nations Bible Church, MZANBC, continues to operate under the Governor's executive order concerning indoor gatherings. Therefore, the facility remains closed and no worship services and/or events and activities of any kind will be held until further notice. You will be immediately advised when a determination is made to reopen. We are grateful you chose to join us today for Pastor McClendon's teaching. If you have questions during the week, please call the administrative office at 517-668-2622, Tuesday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And join us this week for our next broadcast. Please remember during this time to be safe, be well, and be blessed.